There are now so many apps around finding love. People just call them the apps. And what works about them and what doesn't work about them?
Well, I would say what works about them is that it helps people just find prospects. And I mean, that is kind of a big deal because, in a lot of points in the past, you were kind of subject to fate and had to be kind of passive in your own dating life. If there wasn't someone in your community or someone that your friends knew to set you up with, you might have just had to, wait around. And today there is more agency. You can kind of decide that you want to date and go out and download these apps and set a date up. But the flip side of that agency is responsibility. And, a lot of people feel like dating is like a side job now. It takes time. It takes, time out of your normal life because you're meeting up with strangers essentially for a job interview rather than kind of meeting people in your regular life while you're with your other friends at parties or bars. And so it sets up kind of a strange dating situation. And I think for a lot of people, it also, leads to too many options. It's kind of the flip side of not having a lot of options, but it does feel like when there are so many people that you could be swiping through, it's exhausting, first of all, and then also kind of, feels like these aren't real people, but just sort of, that it's a game and it becomes very transactional.
In what ways have political trends poisoned the dating well?
So I think that we are in a very tricky political and cultural moment for dating just because men and women are kind of growing further apart in a lot of ways, and especially among young people. You see that young men are moving further to the right, young women growing more progressive. And I think for a lot of women in particular, it can just sort of feel like this is not a time where I trust men. I feel respected by men. I don't necessarily want to go out and meet strangers who are men. We have an administration that is, stripping away reproductive rights and protections against gender discrimination. And you can see in surveys that there is this kind of resentment among a lot of men, kind of a backlash to Me Too, a backlash to women gaining financial independence, going to college more than men now, where, there's among Gen Z even far more women who identify as feminists than men. So I think there is a real feeling among women that the sort of larger political backdrop it's seeping into individual relationships and making it really hard to trust people.
Is that happening on gay and straight apps? Meaning, you've got older, you've got younger, so many of these Tinder and Hinge, etc. More and more people are signing up for them. And are the problems with dating with heterosexual couples, or is this endemic to the format itself?
This is something I think about a lot. And I think that on the one hand, a lot of queer people are having a hard time dating too. And certainly some of the issues with apps, with modern dating are, just kind of baked into the structure of how we do it these days. And I hear, a lot of people looking for gay relationships who are talking about a lot of the same frustrations, for instance, with dating apps, just kind of showing like a million people they could potentially meet up with, but then kind of always ending up in ghosting or people not responding or not getting treated well. I think because, there's a real lack of accountability that comes with dating strangers. If you have social connections in common, you're, I think, just a lot more likely to treat someone well. Like someone's going to be waiting to hear about how the date went. So that's just one example of ways in which, I think it's not just a problem for straight people. But I do also think, within straight relationships, there are these issues of men and women growing further apart and kind of the trust disintegrating. And you hear a lot of people talk about this idea of like heteropessimism today, which, I think just gets at this idea that a lot of women particularly are fed up with the way that they're being treated by men on the apps. And with this kind of backdrop of like hearing about, how few men would call themselves feminists, or the kind of whole manosphere of resentful single men becoming this kind of cultural force that is like swaying elections. I do think it is kind of a unique context also for women who are looking for straight relationships.
Yeah, because with the conversation around the T app and now the T on her app, it feels like those are not matchmaking services. Those
Nice.
feel very hostile, and to me, it's some weird tipping point in the story of social media matchmaking.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, I think T really, it was just a great demonstration of what we're talking about. I mean, first of all, the fact that so many women wanted a platform to, discuss men that they might be dating, to talk about who might have treated other women badly. A lot of people, pointed out rightfully issues with that app, but I do think there is a reason that women wanted something like this. So many women having bad experiences and just kind of, feeling like it's a risk these days to kind of go out and trust men. And then, with the whole security breach that happened with that app where women's photos ended up being shared on the internet, women who had used this app and their private messages exposed.
Men gleefully saying, look, you deserved it.
Yes.
Right? Like this was defamatory. This was again, it's just a case where I don't feel the technology making things better.
No, yeah, right. It demonstrated both the gleeful cruelty of a lot of these men out there and sort of what women are facing in their dating lives. And also the ways that women have been failed by tech companies that are supposed to be helping them date, or supposed to be, like T is supposed to make dating safer for women. And it's just this horrible irony that, it put a lot of women in danger.
And revealing to men who feel like, how do I find love if I'm the enemy?
Right. Yeah, I think it's this very sort of difficult period where, when there is that kind of lack of trust and sort of retreat, men and women retreating from each other. I think women retreating because they don't feel safe or respected, but also, probably some good men out there who are then also retreating because this, just they don't know what is expected or wanted from them. They don't know quite how to do this the right way. They feel like the enemy. And then, of course, like that leaves the men there who are perhaps less likely to be thinking about these things in the first place, who are more resentful. So I do think it's a dangerous cycle.
Am I part of the problem and are you part of the problem? Meaning, are news stories about how bad it is kind of contributing to the atmosphere? Are pundits talking about, or podcasters, right? Like kind of doing the men are this, women are that. Like, are we making it worse?
I worry about that. I do. And I think there's so much of a narrative these days about how bad dating is and yeah, about, women's sort of valid fears about what could go wrong. Like, I don't want to give readers the idea, or listeners, the idea that it's always going to be bad, that they always need to be distrustful. But I also think there's a reason that this narrative exists. People are picking up on something. And, people want to feel like that is heard, like they're not crazy.
Hmm.
So I think some kind of balance needs to be struck where we're like discussing these issues that already exist, um, and also not sort of taking advantage of that fear, which I think, there's a way in which the T app kind of exploited this sort of fear that a lot of women have, and didn't ultimately help them. And I do think, you've seen fear of sexual assault rising among women since,
Yeah.
in the last few years, you've seen people saying they're um, uh, distrustful of dating apps, feel that in the number of women who feel that dating apps seem safe, that's kind of growing. So I do think there's a real there's an ambient sense that things are all wrong, and some of that is rooted in truth, and some of it is kind of a reaction to the narrative, and it's hard to pull apart, where one starts and one begin and one ends.
Especially if one starts with physical safety and intimacy, but then also you've got anxiety about emotional
Yeah,
intimacy and safety. Like
right.
that, yeah, the distrust, like it only gets worse in a way if people are already anxious
Hmm.
about what it takes to make a connection.
Right, right, right. And I mean, I think on the one hand, those, the physical and uh, emotional bad experiences can be interconnected. Like there is a way in which, in the conversation about the T app, I was kind of struck by how many people were saying, like, well, it's not just a place where women, talk about uh, physical abusers. They're also just like gossiping about men. And I do think, there was a lot of due process and privacy issues with that app. And I would not, say that it was a great product. But at the same time, I don't think there's a complete divide between those things. I think a lot of times when people are saying that there was gossip, people are talking about women having, describing experiences that were upsetting to them, being treated badly on a date, or even something that might sound more subtle, like, a man like never asking them any questions. Like it is, there's such a spectrum, and a lot of the issues people were talking about were things that, shouldn't ruin a man's reputation and mean that women never date them again. And that wouldn't be right. But, I also think it's fair for women to be saying, like, I'm tired of having uh, a lot of bad dates that are making me feel really bad and make me want to sort of just drop out of the dating game entirely.
In the end, how do you prevent whatever frustrations you might personally have from getting into your work? Because, like, for me as a journalist, each week I'm doing something completely different. You're doing something that, like, is connected in some ways to your personal experience. And I can imagine, of course, critics being like, "Oh, well, of course she's going to say that she's a single woman." Like, how do you tease apart yourself um, and affirming something that people believe to be true?
Hmm. I think I actually, I think it's, first of all, I think it's like in some ways a good thing that I'm not coming from like a total outsider perspective, because I never want it to feel kind of like zoological where I'm like
Yes, I'm worried
talking
about
about.
that with this. I was like, should I even do this topic? Like, I got married like when Craigslist was out. Like, it felt like I could not participate. So I do hear what you're saying on that.
Yeah, no, and I mean, I think in some ways that's helpful. Like you are able to ask questions from a real place of curiosity. Like this is strange to me. Like tell me what this is like. And I think that's important too. I think it's important to have both. I do think like I like that I can kind of tell sources I'm talking to, like, hey, I understand this. Like I'm, I've been through it myself. I'm not judging or kind of ogling. But then I also think it's really important that, like, every time I write a piece, I'm not just relying on my own observations. I
Yeah,
am,
there's a lot of data out there. All these app companies have like research blogs, and they're more than willing to share.
yeah, there's a lot of research going on. And that's always the basis of every piece is, finding studies, talking to researchers. And I think I use my own experience sometimes to like think about where to look and what stories I should talk to researchers about. But I also think, I kind of first started writing a little bit from the opposite perspective of like, everyone is talking about dating being so hard. I actually think dating has always been hard. And, so even though I was having a hard time dating, I was kind of like being almost overly cautious and sort of thinking like, I should not just assume that dating is particularly hard right now. And I kind of took the opposite tack. And then, as I've been reporting this and learning more about it and researching, like I think I've really learned some reasons that modern dating in some ways is particularly hard in a way that kind of has lined up with my personal and observational anecdotal experience, but which I feel like I kind of came around to actually through the intellectual pursuit rather than the personal one.
Yeah. I feel like scared to tell you any dating stories of my vintage because the few times I've mentioned it in passing to like people I work with, they look at me like I'm crazy. Like at one time I went on an extended riff about the misconnection section of Craigslist and people looked at me like, "Oh, there was like a serial killer section for dating." Like and I kind of felt like those were considered romantic at the time. I met people who actually got married, off of a missed connection internet posting. And I didn't, to me, I'm like the stranger that you meet in an app, like, how is that different from the stranger someone else met in the grocery store? It's still a stranger. And it just doesn't seem like you guys have all the data in the world and it hasn't made it easier
Yeah.
in that
100%.
process.
Right. And I think that you're so right that, people have all this nostalgia for what they imagine dating used to be like, but often they're, thinking of sort of serendipitous encounters with strangers and that,
Yeah, something they saw in the movies. Like
right.
it was still fraught with rejection. Like you had voicemails that you had to check on a physical machine. Like there were
Right.
lots of aspects of it that were absolutely trash. Blind dates,
Mhm.
um yeah, just being rejected in public in front of all your friends somewhere or whatever. As you said, a date goes bad and like other people now know about it because it's not
Mhm.
someone far away on an app you ghosted and hope you never see in the city. Like there were ways that it was not good. And I
Yeah.
don't know if it's our capacity for risk anxiety, the standard, so to speak, that was different.
Right. Right. I mean, is vulnerable in a different kind of way. That's so true. Like you weren't necessarily meeting up with as many strangers, but you were kind of, your dating life was less private. Like it is, there's a way in which you can be so private and almost kind of anonymous on apps these days. And it is like, I wouldn't be used to that. And I've had some times where I've been set up by friends and I do feel very self-conscious about that. Like everyone knows that we're going on dates. Like, if it doesn't work out, what is everyone going to think? Like everyone's in everyone's business. And
Yeah. Yeah. What they'll think is you're a bad person. I'll just tell you like 100%. I mean, it gets messy. It
yeah.
gets messy. Is that better or worse than being ghosted repeatedly to the point where you're like
Right.
scared to put yourself out there? I don't know.
Right. Like ghosting is almost the opposite of messy. It's like too clean. It's just like complete clean break. That's
But
it.
more
Just move on.
traumatizing. Like people talk about ghosting. It's
Yeah.
like the act of not being responded to is somehow like people talk about it like it's a trauma.
Hmm. Hmm.
And I'm like, try being dumped in a restaurant.
Right. I mean, I think there's a reason people hate ghosting, but I do kind of think it's become this sort of like boogeyman for modern dating where
Yeah.
so often people are talking about ghosting being the problem. And I think it's because a lot of people have experienced it and, so they're like, that's on their minds. But I think there's something to be said sometimes for like the mutual soft ghost, of
Oh my God. Faith, the mutual soft ghost. You mean when y'all let your relationships peter out?
that is what I mean. But I will say only in the very early phases, after one or two dates, and not when you've been dating someone for months.
But sometimes all that bit by bit talking can go for like 3 months.
Oh
Like,
yeah.
like there's something about the low the low stakesness of texting and of DMing and of having that very quick bite that is very different from having to pick up a physical phone and call someone or meeting up with them just one more time. Like, I feel like people can, yeah, like again, creating a situation that like goes longer than it needs to, but actually doesn't accomplish anything anyone wants out of it except the dopamine hit of being something you did on your phone.
Right. I think it's such a good point. It's funny, like dating is supposed to be kind of like more efficient now with apps, but often it's the opposite that's true. Right. Like there's so many sort of situationships that go on for many months because there's no conversation happening about, what each person wants, no direct communication, right? A ton of just like messaging on the apps before even ever meeting. Like it's not actually efficient a lot of the time. It's kind of like slowly wasting time with a large number of people. Like I do think, I know so many people who have had so many situationships at the same time or one after the other where they're kind of they get to the end of it and they feel like that did not have to last so long. We kind of just like didn't figure out immediately because we both kind of felt like maybe it would work, but then we also had other options. We're talking to other people. Like it's just a lot of ways in which you sort of linger in something.
So if matchmaking is back and double dating is back through the apps, of course, what's one thing you would want to know about pre-app dating that I or anyone else could answer, that you have questions about? Like people have nostalgia about it, but you have questions about.
I guess I'm curious how much people actually struck up conversation with strangers or near strangers rather than, because I know sort of the most common way people used to meet partners was like through friends and family. So, that's one thing. And I think to some degree it kind of still happens. But the sort of people have so much nostalgia for, like people just chatting sort of more loosely with people they don't know well. And I'm curious, in what spaces you found that really happened and how common it was.
I think it's not that everybody was just sparking off of everyone all the time. Like, I'm sorry I've made this conversation feel like the grocery store was like so lit. Like, that isn't what I mean. But you weren't looking at your phone all the time. Like, you just weren't. Like, the odds of actually even making eye contact with someone was just way higher. So, like, when I met my husband, I think he was just like sitting outside the office having a cigarette. And I was like, hi, is this the place? Like I'm looking for a building. That was an interaction we would not have if I was on my phone using a map app and he was on his phone, right? Like
Yeah.
vaping or whatever.
Right.
Um, and it's the same thing. I remember once a guy hopped off the bus to be like, hey, like, are you single? And I told someone that story and they were like, that is crazy. Like, that person would be a stalker. Like, I would run from that person. And I was like, oh, I thought it was kind of sweet, like, again, if I was wearing earbuds, I would have kept walking. Like, we just were not as shut off from each other the way I feel like now everyone is, of all age groups, like gay, straight, whatever. You are taking the time that would have gone to potential interaction and giving it to a billionaire who runs an app. Like whether that's Instagram or Facebook or TikTok or whatever, you have like given that serendipity to someone else, so that you can like see another video and it's another kind of dopamine hit.
Hmm.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. Sort of like openness and presence in the world that made you like, yeah, just more open to connections with other people.
Yeah, like the elevator was awkward. You know
Yeah,
what I mean? That's why we all looked up. That's why we all tried not to look away. But if your eyes met with someone
right.
and they tapped you on the shoulder, if you saw them every day for months because they worked in the same building, like that's building something that's
Hmm.
not the same, even though maybe it isn't as rich, I don't know, as swiping that same thing all the time, texting all the time, sexting all
Mhm.
the time, and then letting it peter out.
Right.
Like,
Yeah.
so yeah.
I was recently talking to my editor about how I want to try an experiment where I just make more eye contact with people.
Oh, people hate it.
Yeah.
They like
Oh,
seriously, they
man.
just like they
Yeah.
think you are like a little bit irritating because they're doing something. And that something is usually their phone.
Right. That is such a bummer. I mean, I was hopeful that,
But I
like,
want you to try
you
it
know,
because
I
I want to read that article in The Atlantic.
have complained about, no one talking in bars, for instance. But then I'm kind of like, well, to be fair, I don't make eye contact with anyone in bars. So how would someone be able to start talking to me if I'm not looking at them? I'm like only looking at my friend or my feet, you know?
Yeah. I remember doing a news story where I have this thing about when I'm on assignment, I don't eat in the hotel room or whatever where I'm staying. I always go somewhere. So I eat by myself a lot when I'm out in the world. And like the craziest stuff has happened, the way people respond to you, you know? Like there were some women who came over to me kind of like, "Oh my god, you're amazing. This is so brave," because I was like eating and had a book. Like there's just this sense of like, well, what would you be doing here on
Right.
your own, making eye contact with people? There's something up with that.
Hmm. Yeah, it's funny. On the one hand, we talk so much about people spending more time alone. On the other hand, it's not happening in public. Like it's really like not just a retreat from social interaction, but also just like being in the world. I took a solo trip to Greece a couple of years ago, and everyone that I talked to about this plan was like, "Oh, it'll be so great! You can meet new people, you can go on dating apps, you can, you know." And I was like, "Oh no, I'm happy to be just like alone in a different place." Like to me that sounds really nice, but it is like a strange idea to people that one would even want that.
Well, good luck with the apps. I've already told my husband divorce is not an option,
No, don't
literally
do it.
because I just don't want to go on the apps. Like,
Yeah.
that's the reason.
Right.
I'm just like, I'm not going back out there. That's not at. We're in it to win it now. Because I don't have the skill set necessary to function in the algorithm. So I'm just going to have to live vicariously through your writing.
And root for me, keep your fingers crossed.
Okay, Faith, thank you so much.